This is Abigail Carl Clausen, and I'm here with Sandra Kienitz, here near Cuauhtemoc, Chihuahua, with the Rebels, Exiles, and Bridge Builders Oral History Project. Today is February 3rd, and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about Sandra's experiences here in the Campos. Welcome, thanks for participating.
Thank you for having me.
So can you just briefly introduce yourself to us?
Yes, I was born in Brazil and have lived in several places around the world. I will talk a little bit about some of those. And I've been now in Mexico and here specifically in Cuauhtemoc for the past 4 years, a bit over 4 years. And I have a degree in international relations and a master's in peace building. I will also talk a little bit about that. My mom is from a Mennonite colony in Paraguay, and my dad is from Brazil.
So can you tell us a little bit about your connection here to the Campos?
Yes, of course. I have been living here for the past 4 years. I live in the Manitoba colony and have been living around different places, also a little bit in the Swift Current colony. But I do not have family in this area. That's very unusual, I think, for a Mennonite from this area not to have family around here. I came here for work, and so that was my connection, my in to coming and living here. But I have found some amazing people who have, quote unquote, adopted me and have welcomed me and made me part of their families here. So, and I work for a company that is also based here in the colonies.
So you are a program coordinator for the Mennonite Central Committee in this region for 3 years. What was your previous connection and or experience with Low German speaking communities?
My only connection before coming here to Mexico was through my family. As I mentioned, my mom grew up in the Fernheim colony in Paraguay. And although I was born and grew up in Brazil in an area where there were no Mennonite colonies and no Mennonites whatsoever, we would go back every other year to visit family. And so my contact would be through these visits of 2-3 weeks of interacting with my cousins and their playmates, all my relatives, aunts and second cousins and grandparents. But I never before moving here, I did not have the experience of living in what it meant to live in a Mennonite community.
What were some of your responsibilities as coordinator?
So I came here 4 years ago for a 3-year term, and my list of my to-do list and my responsibilities was a long list. But one of the main things that I was commissioned to do was to help with transition that MCC was going through. MCC in Mexico had 2 different programs. One was exclusively working with Low German Mennonites, and the other with Mestizo Mexicans and indigenous communities all around the country. And MCC wanted to bring these 2 together into one program for Mexico with all the different cultures, all the different groups it was working with here. And so it was the idea was to work with the Mennonite community, to work with the MCC part in the Low German community, to help them understand and help them transition, kind of being a facilitator, a coach on going through this change. It included a great array of different things that had to happen. But also becoming more familiar with an MCC framework that emphasizes on empowering communities and help them look forward to what are our goals, where do we want to move to, how can we continue improving this community and using the resources on the ground that already exist, the potentials, the strengths, and kind of make them, put them in the center and grow them. So, and that involved several things: facilitating conversations, coaching leaders, giving ideas, and giving also providing resources, be it through a training or through material, to get this work going into a new direction, and also supervising MCC staff in this area. So that was one part with the Low German Mennonite community. But as I mentioned, MCC was integrating what was being done with Low Germans as well as with other communities in Mexico. So my job also included working with migration at the border. And so it was also working with organizations and leaders and people there with the same things I mentioned before. But at the same time, it was a very different work because it is a very different culture. It is very different needs. It is different potentials, different needs, as I already mentioned. And so it was a very, very diverse job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hidden under the name coordinator.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what were my responsibilities.
Yeah. So you've traveled and worked cross-culturally all around the world. Describe some of those experiences, and then also how did they prepare you to work in this culturally and linguistically complex region?
Before coming to Mexico with MCC, I worked, one experience that was very important was working with an organization called Operation Mercy in India. I went there as a communications officer. That meant that I collected stories and information of projects that the organization was doing in India, which ranged from starting schools to health community advisory to microfinance programs. It was a variety of things that were being done, and so collecting these stories and transforming them into reports, into information that would be sent out to donors. And then doing voiceovers for videos and translations for I speak 6 languages, so translating material from English into other languages, also for fundraising purposes. And these projects were mainly with the Dalits. Dalits is a caste in India, and who's not familiar with the caste system, it is the culture there believes that there are different types of groups of people with different value and different responsibility because they came from different parts of the body of one of their gods, Brahma. And there is one group of people, they are considered outcasts. They're considered that they came from the dust, from the feet of the god. And so they can only do very low types of jobs and have very limited access to education, are very discriminated. It's a very difficult situation. And we were, this organization, Operation Mercy, was also there to empower these communities. And what really caught my attention during that time there was to see how people who had a chance to go to have a better education, to go to university, for example, to study, to become a nurse or a doctor or a teacher or an engineer, these people would always go back to their own communities, back to where they came from, back to their ethnic group that was still suffering, that was still struggling, and to those things that they had learned, the skills that they now had, to implement them to help their own people so that more would have access to a better life and to more hope. And that was something that impacted me very much. It was a very difficult work to see so much so many difficulties, so much discrimination, so many things that these people were going through. But I didn't realize it until when I was already in Mexico. I was already in the Low German Mennonite community. I realized, wait a second, I have a Low German Mennonite background, although I did not grow up in a colony and all that. But I have come back to my people. I grew up very differently. I had a very privileged life in terms of having access to education. And to come back to my people, I don't have relatives here, but our history is the same, and I consider these to be my people, and I have come back to share a bit of what I bring, what I have gained over my life experience, to hopefully share and impact the people around here. So that was when I realized, wow, I feel like that is something I learned back in India, and I admire these people for doing that. And now my life path had taken me the same way, in the same direction. And what I saw those people doing there, I could also apply in my own work here. There are many. I've lived in 9 countries and have done a big variety of jobs but that was the experience that I would say that most impacted me and shaped me to do my work, the work that I did here during my time with MCC.
So what were some cultural differences that you enjoyed, and then some that you found surprising or difficult to adjust to when you first came here to the Cuauhtemoc area?
So my first reaction was it was a culture shock. It was certainly a culture shock. I had never had the experience of living in a Mennonite community, and the communities in Mexico are obviously very different from the ones in Bolivia, which are very different from the ones in Paraguay, which are very different from the ones in Brazil. There are some there as well, and so although I had contact before, I had never lived in one, and it was very different here. So what stood out at the beginning, of course, were the things that I had a negative impression about, or that shocked me or surprised me, or I found very difficult to deal with. One of those was indirect communication. I have also lived in Germany and lived in the United States, and living in those cultures, I have adopted more of a direct communication style. So if I don't agree with something, or if I have an opinion, or I will express that. I will, of course, in a respectful way, but I will express that opinion, and it was, especially the beginning was very difficult, because that I would communicate directly and people would say, oh yes, yeah, okay, yeah. And, but it turns out they would not agree with something, or they had not understood what I was saying, and but would not express that directly to me. And so I would think, okay, we're moving forward, we're doing this, but things would not move forward. Or later I would hear, no, this person is saying this and this about your proposal, and I would be like, well, or suddenly they would blow up and just say it, and I would be like, why didn't you tell me?
Exactly.
Why?
And
I mean, I realized it was indirect communication, but there was something that I said, okay, this is a cultural trait. That I find very difficult. I'm not sure how to, okay, this person said this. Are they saying something with that? Am I not capturing it? And so that would also lead to interesting interactions then also with other people, where I would ask, this is going on, this is what was said, or this is what happened, what does it mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it turned into an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about the dynamics and what was going on and all of that. What I have learned to appreciate about the culture of the Low German Mennonites here in the Cuauhtemoc area, or in Chihuahua. I mean, it's a very diverse groups, but what I have observed that is common from all of these groups is pragmatism.
Yeah.
Very practical, hardworking, and implementing things. And I have come to appreciate that a lot.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of talking about and false promises, or promises in general, or just ideas in the air, but really, okay, we see a need, let's do something about it. How is this gonna be good for us, and let's just implement it and get it done. And I have really come to appreciate the commitment and the dedication and the pragmatism of be it from cleaning a house to helping a family in need, and just really going through with it and not talking a lot about it.
Yeah. So often, even in more liberal Mennonite communities in this region, leadership positions are reserved for men, or sometimes less often for pastor couples. What challenges did you encounter as a single woman in a leadership position?
Yeah, it was quite challenging, that's for sure. When I first arrived, there was actually some direct communication going on directly with me and with my bosses, where people said, listen, we've been asking for this position, we requested it be a couple, or at least a man.
Yeah.
And you have sent us a young woman who's single. And that is not what we asked for. That's not what we need. And I'm grateful that in this instance, my MCC did not listen to this request, because it sometimes it is good to bring in a little shock factor and something a little bit different and a different example.
Yeah.
To break these opinions against that this is not possible. And along the 3 years that I worked with MCC, I heard that a lot.
Yeah.
That it's not possible. And the beginning was very difficult. I would say during the first year, it was hard to see any progress, but especially at the third year, the last year of the work, I felt that I had gained the trust and the respect of many leaders I was working with.
Yeah.
Where I felt that the people who had said since the beginning it's not possible, that I was able to prove that it is possible.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day, what people really value is that you know what you're talking about, and that you're committed to it.
Yeah.
And you're gonna, like I was mentioning before, pragmatism is very valued. And so I felt like at the third year, people were already like, no, it is possible.
Yeah.
It is possible. Yeah. And I did a lot of work in general with leaders, where I would meet up with pastors or youth leaders, or teachers or directors from schools, from different types of schools. We would just have coffee and talk about everything, about plans for the future, struggles in the community, and I would apply a lot of coaching techniques and really not tell them what to do. That was also something that I felt that people were asking for, is tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And that, I think, had been the approach for the past, 10, 20, 30 years, had been very paternalistic, where somebody from the outside would come in and tell people what to do.
Yeah.
And so this was also a new approach that MCC started using, and that I was using also with people, was, what do you want to do? Or and then I would express my opinion. This is why I think this is a great idea, and now let's think through how can you do this, but never saying you should do this or that, because I think for it to be lasting, for something to be lasting, it has to be, the person doing it has to be also committed to that vision, because otherwise it's gonna just die out and not have a continuity. So being a leader in the community as a woman, I think the beginning was very hard, but I see more and more women also stepping into positions of leadership, or taking the risk of being a leader, of taking initiative, beginning with the spaces that are considered more spaces for women in the community, but also stepping outside. Like one of the things that I think was very successful is I worked a lot with the Blumenau School and the Blumenau Church, and they opened their doors and welcomed me to talk about vision for the future, life goals, with teenagers and young adults, where I would challenge them, is your life gonna be really just, and I mean, for some people, this will be their calling of having a family, of staying where their parents and grandparents have been, and be active in that community. But for others, their role in life or their path will lead them to maybe also leaving the community and taking those things that they bring from this community to other parts. And so now over the past years, we have seen a lot of these teenagers and young adults that I talked to about these things, going on an MCC term, on a one-year MCC term abroad, or becoming more involved in their community, in social topics, who have taken initiatives to start new things. And I think in part it is a result of encouraging others who also in this community, like young people, very often have a lesser value, or their opinion has a lesser value than people with more years, and to encourage them and to also become a leader by example. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm wondering, what, if any, special access did you have to female-centered spaces, particularly in more traditional communities, because you were a single female in a role that was not traditional or expected here in the community?
I didn't really have a lot of access to those spaces. Very, very often, I almost felt a little barrier for the fact of not being married, of not having children.
For sure.
And so there was not a lot of access because of that profile, or not having those roles. Yeah, absolutely. Or that not being a part of my identity at that point. And my work was also more focused on working with the already established leaders or groups that were working on social change in the community. And so there wasn't also, so there were other people that were indirectly part of the team here from the community who were doing more of that work.
Oh, for sure.
Focused on education, on health, on what does it mean to be a woman according to biblical standards. So more that type of focus. There were other people who were probably better prepared or had already this easier access and were doing that kind of work. So
absolutely.
I did not have really access to female-centered spaces.
Yeah, that's interesting. What congregations, organizations, and communities did you build relationships with while working for MCC? And what projects or initiatives did MCC sponsor in the region at the time?
The biggest one is what is now known as Servicios Integrales Menonitas. It is kind of the continuation of what MCC was and what MCC was doing in the community, with a focus on education, especially education, literacy, and a little bit of health as well, because knowing how to take care of your body, knowing how to take care of your family, knowledge about what can improve your well-being and your health lifestyle. Well, it is between education and health.
For sure, yeah.
So we would sponsor the operations of this organization. MCC.
Yeah.
I still identify a lot with them. MCC would sponsor the operations of this organization and material and support for further educational courses, capacity building. Yeah. For people they would identify and say, okay, let's invest in this or in that. Another one is Steinreich Bibelschule, because MCC also as an education project, but also to foster leadership. So students that the Bible school would identify as this can be an impactful leader. MCC would sponsor their, give them a scholarship, partial or total, and also Luz en mi Camino. There were different, also Luz en mi Camino started developing, besides their recovery program, started developing preventative material to be handed out in schools, especially Darbschon and Komiteishon. And so MCC sponsored that as well. And started working also with Friedensplatz, kind of indirectly related with Luz en mi Camino, with the recovery center. Also with looking into, okay, what are, how can we support that project, and also think about child protection and support leaders also figuring out difficult issues like when to step in when you see perhaps child abuse, or and how to work with community leaders or with authorities, and what are the right times to take action with one or with the other. And so figuring all of those things out, those difficult topics out. MCC also, I already mentioned before, worked with Blumenau School, and also supported through Servicios Integrales Menonitas material for the Komiteishon, and also promoted a lot this new Darbschon model that started about 16 years ago, I think it is. And in terms of churches, MCC works directly with the IAMU, which is the umbrella conference for Mennonites here in Mexico. And then more closely, I had a good relationship with the CSEM, and the different churches here in the state of Chihuahua. And so I did a lot of leadership coaching with different pastors, or spoke to different churches about both MCC programs as well as conflict transformation, conflict resolution in communities and in families. Different talks depending on what pastors would say. Hey, this, we are probably moving in this direction. Could you talk about peace and justice? Could you talk about programs for young adults or different things? And some of those churches would be especially Ebenezer Church. It's a missions church of the Blumenau Church that is here in town, mainly with the Mestizo congregation. And also did a bit of work with Lebenswasser Church, also talked to youth and leadership coaching. So there were several churches, some that were more enthusiastic about, I want to integrate more of justice, the idea of justice, because we don't talk enough about that in our community, or tell us more about the size of the Mennonite world, like what is there beyond Cuauhtemoc. And so there were many opportunities, mainly with an education focus, awareness raising. Sometimes it felt a bit like motivational speaking.
Absolutely.
And but a lot of openness and interest from different organizations and different churches as well.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the programs and initiatives here in the Low German speaking community, but what partnerships and relationships were built outside the Mennonite community, with the Mestizo community, with the migrant and Raramuri communities in the region?
These were more indirect relationships, either because MCC was working both with Low German Mennonites and other communities. So there wasn't that much integration, I think, at least based on my work, happening between these communities. But as I mentioned before, my work also had to do with migration at the border. And when I would come back, I would talk about those experiences to leaders here. I just came back from a 1-week trip there, and this is what they're doing, and this is what's going on, and these are the migration issues. And in that way, also doing a bit of awareness raising here in the community. Or that would be a contact, for example, through visiting churches. I did a lot of church visiting, contact with some missionaries that work with Raramuri communities in the Sierra, and but also have Low German Mennonite sponsors, and we would get into, okay, how can I really show our appreciation as a missions organization to their generosity, and so also have those intercultural talks about, okay, what does that mean in different cultures here in the region, and also work like at the after-school program. There's an after-school program in Cuauhtemoc, or Un Sueño Realizado, which is for people with disabilities, and so there would be some contacts with different projects with Mestizo and Raramuri communities, but not that much integration happening here in Cuauhtemoc.
So what role did MCC have during this time, if any, in providing support for those impacted by narco violence or engaging in other peace-building work?
Unfortunately, none. There was, before I came to Mexico, there was encouragement from MCC to start alternative peace building and engaging with different types of conflict here in the area. Especially before I came, there was a lot of conflict around water and well drilling. And during that time when there was the conflict with the well drilling, MCC sponsored the trip of some leaders here from Cuauhtemoc to Colombia to get to know the work that Mennonites and Mennonite peace churches do in Colombia with narco, with peace building, with dialogue, and they were encouraged to create an organization or to create a committee, like we do among the Mennonites, create a committee that would be responsible for that dialogue. At the time, it was here with the Barsonistas, the group that was most in conflict with the Mennonites. But it didn't really transform into really an initiative that would then be directly working with narco violence, for example, or other issues. So it kind of, unfortunately, it kind of fizzled out, and the focus continued being on more on other educational and awareness raising aspects than really dialogue and violence prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of years ago, you transitioned out of working for MCC and into a new job in the community. What opportunities and challenges has that brought? And what cross-cultural connections have you made at work and in your personal life?
Yeah, when my term was ending, I was fortunate to be offered the opportunity to interview for a position in a company here in the colonies. And I was, as I was finishing with MCC, I was figuring out, okay, will I continue with nonprofit, or will I go into for-profit and have that experience as well? Yeah. And I decided, okay, this is a good opportunity to get to know a little bit of that world in the same community that I had done nonprofit work. And the opportunity was to learn more about an area that I had not had many knowledge or skills in, which was more of the financial sector. Yeah. And challenges was to in some aspect, in a way, also cultural challenges, because most of my coworkers are mestizos, and it's a very, very different environment. In the nonprofit work, people are committed to a certain extent to a vision. Let's we want to help people doing this, and we want to offer good quality education doing that. And I mean, there's always conflict, differences of opinion, and all that, but people do their best for a cause, to accomplish something, to make an impact in some way or another. While in the for-profit world, and in this context, it's just about the paycheck. And if you're not paying me enough, I'm not going to work towards accomplishing this goal the company has. It's not my problem. Pay me more, and I might put a little bit more effort into it. And a lot of I feel like in the mestizo culture, there's a lot of jealousy, and if somebody is accomplishing something, it's not about, okay, cool, I want to be a part of the team and let's do this together, which is what I, to a certain extent, was more used to from the non-profit world. But it's I'm gonna pull you down. I'm gonna don't stick your head out. Don't be different from the rest of us. And you're accomplishing a goal that's and so that has been a challenge of absolutely. Not really realizing this difference of it's just about a paycheck. It's not about working towards something. Even if we have a conflict, to accomplish better lifestyle, greater well-being, or something like that. It's not about that. So that has been a challenge, and but also this with MCC. One thing I really appreciated was the community of workers that came from all over, be it all over the United States and Canada.
Yeah.
But also local workers,
Yeah.
and like in my team, we were like a person from France, and one from Colombia, and one from me from Brazil, and United States and Canada. So it was a very diverse group, and I've always appreciated multicultural groups.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this work also takes me a lot abroad to other places, or also providers come to us from also from different countries in Europe and North America, and so I continue to enjoy this aspect of work.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but currently you're seeking long-term residency here in Mexico. What motivated that decision, and what are some of your hopes and long-term goals for living in this area?
Yes, that's correct. I'm I applied for my long-term visa.
Yeah.
I hope Mexico would like me to stay. But I have felt very comfortable here. I have learned a lot over the past 4 years. That for me is very important. I have found out that what is very important for me is, one, to know that what I'm doing is making a difference. And number two, not really in an order, but the other one is to be constantly learning something new.
Yeah.
And I have found to be able to do that here. It doesn't mean that I plan necessarily to stay forever. I might be here a bit longer and then be somewhere else in Mexico or somewhere else in the world, or I might be here for the next 20 years. I'm not sure about that. But
absolutely.
As long as I feel also that it is the path that the Divine Spirit is leading me on, I will be here or somewhere else, depending. So
I guess sort of to close this out, what ways have you seen cross-cultural interactions change during your time here? And what hopes do you have for future cross-cultural interactions in the region?
There has been a lot of change here in 4 years. It's impressive, really, really impressive. From visual things, like when I got here, for example, 4 years ago, here the Corredor Comercial that goes through the Manitoba colony has a lot of businesses. And when I got here, it was very few had a logo, very few had a sign on the street. Yeah. And some even didn't really have the name of the business on the building. For sure. So it was kind of like, you are from here, you know where things are, and you will know where to find them and when you need them. Yeah. And in 4 years, I've noticed that many have developed like a corporate image, have put up signs, have changed, modernized the design of their buildings. It has become much more commercial in a way. Yeah. And so that's like a visual difference that I have seen. And in terms of cross-cultural, not that much. I think people continue to travel a lot between Cuauhtemoc, northern Mexico, and Canada. And there are some cross-cultural marriages between Low German Mennonites and the Mestizo community, but that's always been there. On the other hand, many of the people, Low German Mennonites, say, yes, I want the exchange with the Mestizo community, but only as long as it's economic. For sure, yeah. But once it starts to become more personal, more social, more cultural, then I'm good. And no need to further explore that connection, unfortunately. Yeah. And I have not really seen those prejudices change. Yeah, for sure. At the same time, I must say that and I forgot to mention this before, but coming into the community, the most resistance I have felt, or the people who most adamantly said it's not possible for a woman to be a leader in this community, you will be rejected, and who were in a certain way rejecting or being resistant to my work and my presence in the community, were more the ones that considered themselves more liberal.
Oh, interesting.
Than the really people who, as an looking from the outside, you would say, okay, these are conservative Mennonites. These are Mennonites that send their kids to Darb Show and go to Old Colony Church and dress in a certain way and have certain established family roles.
Yeah.
I felt way more welcomed and way more curiosity and interest and openness to talk than I did from people who would be labeled as more liberal, which was very, very surprising to me.
Yeah,
going back to, okay, what surprised me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back in the interview.
Yeah.
And also a project that I forgot to mention that MCC wasn't directly involved with was a dialogue between some Mennonite communities from the Virginia colony and Las Virginias and Buenos Aires.
And that's in the...
close to Casas Grandes.
El Valle area.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a bit more north. Bit
even more
to
north.
Janos.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Around there, the government established a biosphere, which is kind of it's not really a reservation, it's just an area that is declared as very sensitive and very important for the ecosystem in the region. And so different rules apply for that area in terms of what are you allowed to plant and or how many heads of cattle can you have on how much land, and rules like that. Yeah, for sure. To protect in a way that ecosystem, and in that area is a private reservation from I forget now from which organization, the Nature Conservancy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Supported by the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah.
And when the government established this biosphere, the Mennonites thought it was all an idea, or was because of this reservation, and so. The people from this reservation, from the organization, really wanted to have the dialogue with the Mennonites. One, because they said they are farmers; they have the same concerns that we have with water and climate change and all of that. For sure. And we want to be clear that it's not us. Like, we are not the enemy. That was not our decision. This is something from the government. It's something different. Yeah. And we can work together on this. So I went in. I was the only woman in the room. Yeah, for sure. Mennonite men on one side, men from conservationist people on the other, and I was the only woman in the room. Yeah. And as it turns out, the Mennonites had very limited Spanish. Oh, okay, yeah. And I was supposed to be there to kind of help the conservationists have a better idea about, cultural things that would help in the dialogue, would support the dialogue process and not make it break down because of misunderstandings. But I ended up being a translator as well. And there I also felt a respect and openness from these Mennonite men, very conservative, very conservative. We would label them as conservative. Yeah. But and during the breaks they would come and we would talk shop, we would talk business. And, they would express their concerns and so maybe one could say there is in a certain way a shift, or there is maybe a growing openness also to female leadership in that sense, maybe a little cultural change happening in a certain way, or openness to these things that are more maybe seen as a cultural thing coming from a different culture. Yeah, absolutely. Into this community. Yeah, absolutely. But I have seen some change. I see a lot of resistance in in other cultural aspects. But I think to a certain point there is that little nagging knowledge there present in everybody's mind that we can be stronger together.
Yeah.
And I see that also in the Mestizo culture,
Yeah.
that they say there's so much we can learn from the Mennonites. And they can name these things. And maybe situations like challenges like, okay, water scarcity and will end up, I hope, that will continue bringing people together to talk about, okay, what can be solutions to things that might affect us, and therefore be an opportunity also for cross-cultural connection in the community. Where I see still a lot of discrimination is towards the Raramuri community, both from the Mestizos as well as the Low German Mennonites.
Yeah.
But more opportunities towards Mestizo and Low German connections.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking all of these questions, and I hope also that my story will be interesting also for other people and be useful.
Yeah, thank you so much.